Hi, many people ask me if shock absorbers affect the ride height of a vehicle. The short answer is no, it doesn't. However, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how this front strut was actually affecting the ride height of a vehicle. Over here, I've got two struts and I've got two shock absorbers. Some people call these dampers. The reason I made this video is under very rare circumstances, yes, a shock absorber, well in this case a front strut, can affect the ride height, and I'm going to demonstrate why I say that. Right, now this shock absorber was removed from the rear of my car, and as you can see I can pull it all the way out. It's hit the end point. There was a bit of a knock there, but notice that I can just push it right back in, right to the end. Now I shouldn't be able to do that with my hand. Now if the shock absorber was brand new, I would find it very difficult to just compress it with my hand. However, that does not mean that the shock absorber affects the ride height. Even when the shocks are new, the minute the car is put on the ground, the weight of the car will pull the piston down and the car will seat wherever the coil settles. So it's actually the springs that decide the ride height. However, on this BMW, when I changed the front struts, I noticed something strange. The piston will actually not fully extend. For example, it's actually hit a point there and it's stuck and it wants to fall back down. Even when I compressed the springs, I noticed that this piston was actually pulling down the spring. Okay, so over here I have a brand new unit, and this is the faulty unit, the unit that I've been showing. And what I'm doing is I'm just showing how when I level them up, notice how the brand new unit is actually longer than the old unit. You see, I've actually used these spring compression clamps to depress the coil here. And what is happening is the support is actually being pulled inwards. And that is because the piston is being sucked down for some reason. There's that difference which I'm claiming is affecting the ride height. And what I'll do is I'll even prove it to you. I'm going to open this nut over here, and as I open it, you're going to see this end cap pop off, and the piston is actually sucking in. So when I open this cap here, the springs did not move. The piston just went inside. Now I'll show you the video. This is actually longer than this, which means that this is actually being pulled down, mostly because the shock has probably collapsed. I'm just going to show you this in slow motion. Notice that the coils of the spring do not actually extend. That pushing off of the end cap is because the piston is actually pulling inwards, and therefore the cap popped out. Right, just having a look at the old shock. I mean, it's collapsed, and I mean, I'm pumping this. I mean, look at that. That's just with a finger. So this shock is completely stuffed. In this case, these two faulty units were actually reducing the ride height by about 2 centimeters. Even though I'm pulling this out, it's almost got like a spongy feel at the top. It's almost like there's a bump stop here. Some dampers have bump stops built in. So I'm even using my foot here, and I'm really pulling this. I mean, I'm pulling with quite a force here, and it's actually pulling it back down. So in this case, this worn damper is actually reducing the ride height. This is an example of a bump stop. And this actually goes on the outside of the piston. It actually felt like I was fighting against something like this. I could not pull that piston out far enough. And just to show you, if I lift this vehicle a little bit, you can see how easy it is to increase the ride height, and I'm not even pulling that much, and I'm changing it by about 1 centimeter. Now the amount that I was pulling on that strut was way more than what I've just lifted here. Now in the case of this unit, I was pulling the piston up very hard and it was pulling down against me. So that means it's pulling the car down, and I'll just quantify that for you. So if I have to press on the car as though I was pulling that piston out, because remember that piston was pulling down and I was pulling up. So the piston was actually pulling the car down. So I'm going to press on the car using a similar force that I was using, but in the opposite direction, because obviously the shock was pulling down, I was pulling up. So I'm going to pretend that I'm a faulty shock, and I'm going to be pushing down on the car, and I'm measuring the ride height here, which is about 66.5 centimeters. I'm going to show you how the ride height can change. So I'm going to press down on the vehicle as though I'm that shock that was pulling down. And there you can see how it does affect the ride height if the shock is faulty and it's pulling that spring a bit down. So to answer your question, do shock absorbers affect the ride height? The simple answer is no, but damaged shock absorbers might affect your ride height.
If your ride height is below the tolerance but your suspension components are mostly in good working order, then please have a look at your springs. In the vast majority of cases, it's the spring that determines the ride height. So if the ride height is too low, please check that you have the correct springs, or maybe your springs have gotten fatigued. Thanks for watching, and cheers.